Welcome back to Hear Me Out Sports, where we are talking tight ends for week 5. We had a pretty good showing for week 4, so let's get hyped for it and let's kick it off. All right, so as we mentioned, week 4 was pretty good. We had 76.19%. Considering the fact that above 75 I'll count as a win, I like it. Let's look over the hits real quick. We got TJ Hawkinson, who went off. We've seen not a lot of him in those first few games. But TJ Hawkinson, man, week 4, he was the target. That we'll talk more about him later, but it's nice to see a high ceiling for him. Gerald Everett, we've been high on him. He's been consistent. It's nice. George Kittle as well. We benched him, and we did so rightly. So that's a hit in our book. Misses, man, some of these guys went off. Like Mo Ali Cox, he did well. Mark Andrews, though, he did not perform, and it's kind of disappointing because we've seen so many great weeks from him. So hopefully this is a one-off. Hopefully this is his absolute floor. Kyle Pitts, we gave him a chance, came back to bite us. Close calls, though. We had Kylan Granson and Robert Tonyan, who barely passed our threshold of 10 points in PPR leagues. So without those, we would have even had a higher percent, maybe closer to 80. But we'll kick it off first with our very first game of the week, Thursday night. We got the Colts versus the Broncos. We've got Mo Ali Cox, who I have in the start column. We showed us our ceiling. It was huge. And so I like this. I think he's building that connection with Matt Ryan, so that's something to watch out for. Broncos, they give an average of 10.3 points per game to tight ends. So with that being our threshold, I think that he could continue to hit that. Shows a high ceiling, again, like we mentioned. So it is a risky start, but because of how high that ceiling has potential to be, I want to keep him there. Denver Broncos, combined total of 16 pass attempts for both of these people, and only 8 completions. So I'm not super high. I still don't think Russell Wilson's that good, even though catch us in the quarterback video coming up. We'll talk more about Russell Wilson there. Now let's head over to Green Bay, where we have the Giants versus the Packers. I am benching everyone in this one. Now Robert Tonyan, he did barely pass our threshold last week, but I got to see it again in order to feel comfortable starting him. He only had 2 targets. It just so happened that one of those was a touchdown. And I'm not huge on big play-dependent people, so we're going to keep him benched. Now, let's look at New York Giants, where we have a couple more guys benched. Packers allow 4.5 points per game to tight ends. They're number 4. They have a pretty stout defense as far as tight ends are concerned, so I don't think that they're going to be getting a lot of points here. And they've only had 9 targets on the year, so listen, with that, they're benched. We got Bills versus Steelers, where we are starting Pat Freiermuth. Man, I have been very pleased with him. Number 7 tight end, 9 targets in week 4, which is pretty good. And he's broken the threshold 3 out of the 4 weeks. Week 4, he led in targets and completions for the Steelers, which is something it's awesome to see if he's your tight end. Dawson Knox, on the other hand, he hasn't broken the threshold yet. Sure, he's gotten close a few times, but I think there's too many receiving threats and better receiving threats there in Buffalo. I think he's a fringe because Steelers do allow over 10 points per game to opposing tight ends, so be on the lookout for that. If you don't have other options, he might be a decent one. Now, we got the Chargers versus the Browns, where we got the Chargers starting Gerald Everett. We stayed true to him despite his off week on week 3. He came back in week 4 and did very well. 26 targets total, so he's averaging 6.5 targets per game. But his production is pretty good with that. He's ending as number 6 tight end for the week. Not for the week, but for the season so far. And he's averaging 12.6 points per game. So I'm going to keep him in there. Cleveland Browns, I was kind of split on this. I think Njoku will break the threshold several times throughout the season, but I can't predict which ones he's actually going to break it on. He's averaged 10.4 points per game, but that's highly swayed by week 3. Week 3 was phenomenal, but he's only broken the threshold 1 time so far, so that week 3 really carried him so that he has an average that's above the threshold. So, not a comfortable start, so that's why I have him sat. They are a run-centered offense, but you can see that high ceiling from that week 3 game. Now let's head over to Chicago Bears versus the Minnesota Vikings, where we have Cole Kmet, taking up room on the bench once again. I think he's trash. He's had 8 total targets, so not a lot of opportunity coming his way, where he's only averaging 2 per game. Like, that's not what you want to see. And what has he done with it? Well, 2.7 points per game. So it's not like he's breaking off touchdowns and 50-yard runs. So he's going to stay bench. Irv Smith and Johnny Munt. Although Munt gets the start, Irv Smith is definitely the pick out of these two. He outsnapped Munt by 23 snaps, meaning he gets more playing time, right? And he also has run more routes. He ran 30 routes as opposed to Munt's 5. So he's definitely more the passing threat. So if you're going to start one of these two, it'd be Irv, but I'm going to have both of them benched. We got the Detroit Lions versus the New England Patriots. Lions coming off of a hard loss, mainly because of their defense, but man, their offense is clicking. They are putting up points left and right, and I think they're number 1, if I remember correctly, as far as points scored on offense. And with some of those injuries happening, I think TJ Hawkinson will continue to perform. We saw he had a super high ceiling in this last week. He was able to make that connection with Jared Goff, and he's kind of looking like his old self, where he's going out, stretching out for some of those, not perfectly placed balls, and he's able to do what he can. He's a number 3 tight end, despite only really showing out in this last week, but I think that there's lots of potential. And let's look at the injuries. The more injuries there are on that offensive receiver core, the more chance he has of blowing up. Patriots, on the other hand, benching them both. Possible injury to Jonnu, which means we'd be relying on Hunter Henry, but 11 targets this season between the two of them. We got 4.3 points per game for Jonnu or Hunter. And listen, it's not a favorable. It is a favorable matchup against Detroit because they allow over 16 points per game. So that's something to keep in mind, but I don't think they're going to pass their way, which means I don't think they're going to break that threshold. Now let's head over to New Orleans, where we got the Seahawks versus the Saints. Seahawks, wow. Listen, they still have these 3 tight ends, and they're still playing all 3 of them, but it's really fitting into their offensive scheme. Now, can I trust any one of them particularly? No. If I had to, it'd probably be Will Dissly because he seems to be getting the touchdowns, but I think they're big play dependent because of how much they're splitting the ball. I think they are playing a better defense this week, so I want to get your hopes up, want to hold your breath. But it is impressive that they have 3 tight ends, and all of them are placing in the top 25 as far as tight ends are concerned. Now, Saints, I'm going to bench them both. Taysom Hill, he's a versatile weapon, but he just doesn't get enough opportunity to even score any good points. On the other hand, Juwan Johnson, he's the real tight end for New Orleans. He usually gets more of the targets, and he's averaging 5.2 points per game, so I'm going to keep them both benched. Miami Dolphins, we got Mike Gesicki. He is the number 27 tight end overall, which is not great, so let's leave him benched. All Seattle tight ends beat him out, just like we talked about in the last bit. All 3 of them are beating out Mike Gesicki, so I'm not for him. He's had 10 targets, and Hurts. Listen, I just think that the QB being hurt, it's going to change the dynamic. I just don't know how. So until I know how, we're going to leave him benched. It could hurt him. It could help him. Conklin, a little bit of an off week last week, but we're going to let him play because Dolphins allow 17.4 points per game to opposing tight ends, and he's broken the threshold 3 of the 4 games. The one off was 8.2 points, and that's pretty dang good for his low week so far. And we just hope that there's no QB problem because that was his last week. So maybe with Zach Wilson stepping in, it might be a problem for Conklin. Maybe he's not getting the looks as he did before with Flacco. But with that, let's head over to Tampa Bay and look at the Falcons versus the Buccaneers. Kyle Pitts, we gave him a chance, and yet he still kind of let us down. So I'm not super hyped on him. I got to see multiple, consistent, good games before I decide to start him again. He's 10 of 22 on the season, which is not great. We want at least over 50%. That's kind of at the floor. That's kind of at the bottom. He's had 1 touchdown in 21 games, too, so that means that he's not really the go-to target when it comes to touchdowns. Now, the Buccaneers, we got Cameron Brate, he has a concussion, so that's kind of a problem. But only broken threshold 1 of 4 games and was on track last game, but he wasn't able to make it. I think he has a super low floor. We'll see if he continues to get looks and if he can even clear concussion protocol. If he cannot, Cade, he's going to be benched as well. Now, we head over to Washington, where we got the Titans versus the Commanders. Josh Swaim, we're going to leave him bench because he's not really tight end. He's more of an additional lineman for some of those really good running backs they got, mainly Derrick Henry. But he had no targets in week 4, so that's kind of hard to advocate for him. Forgive me for slandering this name first, but Chigozim Okonkwo, yeah, that's a bench, but I think he's showing potential. We'll need to see some proof in more weeks, but he did all right in this last week. So we'll look at him in future weeks and give you the picks. Logan Thomas, I'm going to start him. I think the Washington Commanders are on their way down, so he's a fringe start. But the fact that he plays 74% of snaps and he led in receptions last week, I think that that's a pretty good bit to go for him. Now, he had 13 catches on the year for 106 yards, so he's averaging 8.2 yards per catch, which isn't that great. It shows not a lot of productivity. But with Tennessee allowing 15.8 points per game, we're going to leave him start in the hope that Carson Wentz can figure out their offensive scheme over there and figure crap out and keep hitting Logan Thomas. We've got now the Texans versus the Jaguars. O.J. Howard, we're leaving him benched. With Jordan Brown on out, he has now more of a target share, but he's still not producing. He's only broken the threshold 1 out of 4 weeks, which is not what we want to see from our tight ends who should be starting. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars, on the other hand, we got Evan Ingram with Zay Jones more than likely returning this upcoming week. I think that they're going to continue to pass it to these wideouts. I think that they are a pass-centered offense, which works in favor of the tight end, but I don't think they're going to him too much. He averages 4 targets per game, which isn't great. It's hard to do a lot with 4 targets, and he's only broken the threshold once. So Evan Ingram is a bench. We got now the 49ers versus the Panthers. George Kittle, as I mentioned earlier, he's kind of being used more as a blocker than anything else. So he's going to stay bench. We called it last time, and it's still good. So Carolina Panthers, though, Baker isn't looking great, and the offensive scheme looks horrible. I said that last week. I'll say it this week, and I kind of expect to be saying it for the next couple weeks at least. Until then, maybe they can figure their stuff out. But as of right now, no, it's a bench for me. Cowboys versus Rams, Dalton Schultz. I like Schultz, but he hasn't really been producing too much. Week 4 was horrible. He had 0 catches on his 3 targets. Also, a little bit concerned with Cooper Rush being there because it seemed like Cooper was hitting CeeDee Lamb more. But watch out for Dak Prescott's return. If he does return this week or in later weeks, maybe that changes and Dalton Schultz all of a sudden becomes a start again. Los Angeles Rams, Tyler Higbee, he's been pretty consistent. He's broken threshold 3 of 4 weeks. One off was 8.9 points, which again, really great. 14 targets last game alone. That's exactly what we like to see. I think that's his second game with double-digit targets, and he's the number 5 tight end this year. So we're going to keep him started. Now we head over to my matchup of the week in Eagles versus Cardinals game. We got Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. Both of these guys showing dang good games so far this season. On the Eagles side, Goddard, he has broken the threshold 3 or 4 games, and guess what? His one off was 9 points. Again, really good. Cardinals don't have a great defense either, so I think he could show out. He's become a really good target for Jalen Hurts. So I like this matchup. Now, Zach Ertz, broken the threshold every game so far, so very consistent target. Very consistent start. Second option in the passing game, right behind Hollywood Brown. And I hope that this game will be a shootout and that there will be high scores all around. But I'm giving this one to Goddard between the two teams. Let's head over to Baltimore versus Cincinnati. Bengals. Listen, Hurst, he's barely broken the threshold in the last 2 minutes. He broke it last week in the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. It just happened to be a touchdown. So great for him. I don't think that this is something they can continue to do. So I'm keeping him benched. I think he really is big play dependent, and I think it is a receiver-saturated offense. There's so many targets there, and I don't want to choose any one of them, especially the tight end being the one. Baltimore Ravens, let's start Mark Andrews and hope that that was his absolute floor that we saw last week, because that was horrendous. But they went against a really good Bills defense. Let's head over to Kansas City, where we have the Raiders versus the Chiefs. Darren Waller, not great couple weeks, so I haven't seen great target share in his direction, and there's not a ton of production. I think he's out of the top 40 as far as production is concerned, but that does include some of those one-offs where, some guy has one catch on one attempt, but just happened to be for 20 yards. But let's keep that in mind. I'm still benching Darren Waller until I can see them incorporate him more in the offense. Kansas City, on the other hand, we got Travis Kelce. I like Travis Kelce. He continues to do well. He is absolutely electrifying in that tight end spot, and he's the number one tight end right now in the season. He averages just below 20 points per game, something like 19.7 or 19.3, something like that. And so that's absolutely ridiculous. He's getting decent quarterback numbers as a tight end, and that's going to help you win games. So with that Monday night game, we're going to wrap it up with a bow and a ribbon and say like, subscribe, follow, and do what you got to do to win your fantasy football leagues, which means watching these games. Going forward, I want to personally give the commitment that if I'm screwing up and my percentages are very low as far as how many I predicted to be correct, I'm going to start giving out some money, putting money where my mouth is. But in order to get that money, you got to like, subscribe, and most importantly, comment, because I can see those, I can respond to those, and let us know when we mess up. So for that, we're going to close out week 5 here with the tight ends and hope that wins you some games. Catch you next week.